Exzellenzen, verehrte Gäste,
Your Excellencies, dear guests, dear friends here at the DBB Forum, and everyone joining us via live stream, a very warm welcome to this year's Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. It's a great pleasure and honor to see you here today, because this forum embodies something that is very close to the heart of the Körber-Stiftung, speaking with one another rather than about one another. A particularly warm greeting goes to Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul. Minister, we're delighted that you're here with us today. There are a lot of commotions, and thank you very much. The partnership between the Federal Foreign Office and the Körber-Stiftung for the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum reminds us that foreign policy is never the task of governments alone. It is a shared responsibility of the state, society, and citizens. Since 2011, every foreign minister has supported the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, and I thank you, Minister, for continuing this tradition and carrying our joint mission forward.
Meine Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen, we meet at a time when crises are no longer the exception, but the everyday norm. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine continues to test our resilience. The Middle East is once again at a turning point. The rivalry between China and the United States shapes the international order. Climate shocks, technological upheavals, and economic fragmentation are shaking the very foundations of global cooperation. Faced with all these interwoven challenges, Germany and Europe cannot afford complacency. We must ask the right questions and develop effective answers. But every viable solution begins with a clear view of reality. Germany and Europe must see the world as it is and not as we would like to have it. The latest results of the Berlin Pulse, our annual foreign policy publication, shows very clearly Germans are under no illusions. According to our representative survey, the three greatest challenges are: number one, Russia's war against Ukraine; second, Israel and the Middle East; and three, Germany's relationship with the United States. Last year, the respondents saw the war against Ukraine also number one. Number two was migration. Meanwhile, it's not amongst the top three anymore, and the situation in the Middle East. This realism is a good starting point, but it is not enough alone, because realism must be followed by determination, the will to act. We will not prevail by clinging to old certainties. We will only be successful if we adapt strategically, confidently, and guided by our democratic values. Allow me to name three convictions that should guide our discussion today. Firstly, Germany must expand and rebalance its international partnerships. Dependence on individual markets, our suppliers, has proven risky. The energy crisis was a clear wake-up call. With rare earths, semiconductors, as well as data infrastructure, we are seeing the same pattern. So, just a few weeks ago, few of us knew the name Next-Peria. Today, we all do. Partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, Latin America, or Africa are not nice to have. They are a central pillar of our resilience. Strategic diversification is not a retreat from globalization. It is its renewal, an active shaping of interdependence instead of being at its mercy. Second point, Europe must become stronger politically, economically, and in terms of security policy. The transatlantic alliance endures, at least at the level of governments and institutions, but public perception, trust has suffered. According to this year's survey, meanwhile, 73% of Germans now view the relationship with the United States negatively, compared to only 22% last year. So it's a triple. And only 35% believe that Germany can continue to rely on the US nuclear umbrella. Germans have understood Europe must become more independent. The 28-point American plan for the Ukraine just show that Europe, in the concert of the superpowers, is only a relevant role if it's independent and strong. So militarily and economically, because only those who've got strength themselves can prevent that the right of the stronger will be trump justice. But this, of course, doesn't mean that we would move away from the United States. We have to take our responsibility, and it needs an integrated European defense industry and domestic market, maybe also a capital market union that will give the capital for economic growth and investment into defense. Economic strength and political sovereignty go hand in hand. If one is missing, Europe becomes the stage of the interests of others. With both, it becomes an equal, reliable, and indispensable partner. Third point, international capacity to act requires political majorities at home, because dissatisfaction, social inequality, polarized debates undermine our ability to act internationally. Conversely, stable majorities form the foundation for long-term, effective security and defense policy. In our survey, a clear majority, and that's 72%, support doubling defense spending over the next 10 years. But only 38% believe Germany should assume a leading military role in Europe. These ambivalences are a challenge, but also an opportunity for political leadership. What matters is linking global ambition with the everyday realities of people's lives. When citizens understand why investments in security, climate protection, or broader trade base directly support their own future, when their lives become better and safer, then societal consensus will become possible. Without this understanding, however, even the best strategy will fail at the ballot box, because, as a former US House Speaker said many decades ago, all politics is local. This is true for foreign policy as well as domestic policy. At the Körber-Stiftung, we therefore see it as our central mission to strengthen this link between the international and national discourse. The exchange between generations, perspectives, and disciplines keeps our democracy alive. So, ladies and gentlemen, diversifying partnerships, strengthening Europe's capabilities, and stabilizing domestic consensus, all this forms a simple yet a demanding agenda for Germany and Europe. And this is precisely what makes the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum so important. It creates a space where conversation can lead to cooperation and where analysis can lead to action. Our gathering here today, across borders and despite differences, sends a clear signal. Dialogue remains stronger than division. Let us speak with one another today, not about one another, like our founder said, but let's not only speak, but also listen, not only argue, but also question. Germany and Europe face major challenges. At the same time, we possess significant strength. We shouldn't forget our single market, our prosperity, our partnerships, our cultural diversity, and our deeply rooted democratic convictions. If we manage to diversify our partnerships, strengthen our autonomy, and anchor our foreign policy within a broad societal consensus, then we will not merely survive this era of disruption, we will help shape what comes after it. So, thank you very much, and let's all enjoy this exciting Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paulsen. Dear guests, good morning. A warm welcome also from my side. My name is Sarah Pagung. I'm Program Director for International Affairs here at Körber-Stiftung, and I'm delighted to guide you through this conference day. Körber-Stiftung is thrilled to welcome guests from more than 50 countries here in the room, and even many more in our live stream online. This forum thrives on dialogue. Throughout the day, leading decision makers and experts on foreign policy will share their thoughts with us. and we warmly encourage you to do the same. To that end, please make use of the hashtag #BerlinForum. Those of you who know the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum know that it's a much appreciated tradition that the German foreign minister opens this day of discussions. And we're honored and delighted that Minister Wadephul continues with this tradition. Minister Wadephul, the floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the friendly invitation at the DBB Forum. It's nice to be here, and I'm also a civil servant somehow. Actually a freelance, but it was remarkable for me that I also had to fill in an HR sheet before the federal president handed over the certificate to me, and it started with the primary school. But okay, it worked out. Mr. Paulsen, Ms. Müller, Pagung, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So we are losing our dignity, or we're going to lose a partner. The video that the Ukrainian president showed at Friday evening, and that was a dramatic video and reminded us of the first days of the war. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the decisive task of Europe that this isn't the decision that will be taken only by Ukraine. So we're grateful and, that the American partners are continuing to be committed to the ending of the dying in the Ukraine. But at the same time, it must be clear, it cannot be a decision on the security of Ukraine and Europe without Ukrainians and us Europeans being involved. So we are the advocates of the Ukrainians in this continent. So the discussions that we had over the weekend in Geneva, and they were good discussions. So we welcome the readiness of USA to develop their proposal further. This will bring us closer to a peace suggestion which is just and resilient and durable. So Ukraine, that is heading for a fourth winter of darkness and cold and dying in the front, is wishing for freedom and peace, and we all want to have peace. So, however, whether this wish is going to be fulfilled, whether there's going to be an immediate and unconditional ceasefire as a first step, we don't know that today. So because, first and foremost, it's the aggressor, Russia, an aggressor that every day they take the decision to take the unprovoked attack on the neighboring country and to continue this unprovoked attack. That's why it's central that the current front is the starting point for negotiation, because an aggressor like Russia cannot be rewarded for their aggression. Otherwise, it's going to expand that aggression. So even if today there's going to be a stop to the fighting, what remains is an imperial and aggressive Russia whose ambitions go far beyond the Ukraine. So Russia has got its economy and society geared towards war. At the same time, this Russia is recruiting more soldiers than it actually had for its type of war that it needs and requires for this type of war. So they're requiring more soldiers. So there's one division more per month that they're recruiting. So divisions, so that have their, so there's no doubt about that. They're also looking further afield. They're looking at the EU. They're looking at NATO. So our services say at least Russia is creating the option for a war against NATO, and this at the latest until 2029. And the threat to our country through Russia is not a remote concern. It is reality today already. Today, in a situation where Russia will actually conduct a hybrid war and will confiscate, so that the think tank says the phase 0 of the war against NATO with drone flights, sabotages, and provocations at the border and fake news campaigns. And ladies and gentlemen, so we experience this on the background of a more and more intensive conflict between the large powers, which has concrete consequences for us too. So the superpowers have got a conflict between a more and more confident Republic of China and our ally, the United States of America. So ally, in view of the technological and economic and military and ideological challenges so that arise from the Chinese rise, will actually focus the attention and its capacities more and more away from Europe. So we have a humanitarian crisis, usually man-made in Sudan, on the Gaza Strip. And at the same time, we see worldwide the funds for overcoming the crisis are dwindling. So the readiness for cooperation, international cooperation, is dwindling as, for instance, international law is often replaced by a confrontation style in international relations. So there is people or countries will then see to their own advantage, short-term advantage without compromise. So it's not the strength of the law, but the strength actually means that they're right. So to draw the conclusion, so the situation in which the world is today, since the end of the Cold War, World War was not as threatening and full of crises and demanding. So this situation is also emerged, as Mr. Paulsen said, in the survey data that you've got in your Berlin Pulse. 72% of the surveyed citizens are in favor of increasing military spending, and only 80% of the people in our countries regard Russia as a military threat. So that the transatlantic relationship is changing, that is at least two-thirds of the Germans that they view this with concern. So this situation, Germany has to find its place and newly define its role in the world and Europe. So if the world around us is changing so rapidly, then we also need to change our foreign and security policy accordingly. So, ladies and gentlemen, so that we are successful with this, what we have to do is we have to clearly define our own interests and also, as a federal government, communicated together as one voice. This is nothing that would put off our partners. No, this is what our partners are actually expecting from us. So for me and for us, these interests are clear, and so there's security, freedom, and prosperity. That is the 3 points. So political goals, this means, firstly, together with our partners and allies, we have to warn and deter Russia from a military aggression against NATO. That's so. Secondly, our own economy in Europe and Germany, we have to bring it up and running, so liberate it from dangerous dependencies that we've seen over the past decade. So our critical raw materials and inputs sources, they need to be diversified. Our economy needs to be more digital and reduce bureaucracy and more competitive. And our Europe and our European Union, the basis for our freedom against dangers from abroad and inside, we need to harden it. We need to reform it. We have to protect the basic principles. And yes, we also need to extend this. And I do believe that when we spell out our interests like this, and when we spell out the interests like this, this is also an answer to the questions of those who fear that there's going to be an interest-guided foreign policy would be free of values. This is not the case. So there's, for me, there's no contradiction. So because we define our interests clearly and then follow them up, we also represent our values. Because our interests, they're not the search for short-term unilateral advantages. No, we have deterrence against Russia, not for the deterrence as such. We invest into the future of our European Union, not just as a purpose in itself, but rather in what we see and want. This safety, prosperity, and freedom is the wish for our democratic state based on the dignity and the right of every individual member, as well as international law, needs to be protected. So, once we've identified our situation and formulated our principles, then we can align our partnerships accordingly. So Germany is a strong country. We were the third largest economy in the world, and connected with other European countries, we've got one of the greatest domestic markets in the world. So this makes us attractive for partners to forge partnerships. This is looking into the history of the Federal Republic as part of our foreign policy DNA. And you have to also go beyond the circle of our classic allies, partnerships, also to seek partnerships with those who might be of a different opinion. We have to try, so even if we don't understand their positions, but we can't do without them. So we have to gauge how we can come together, how we could come together in our own interests. This program is what my first months in the office actually took up. So it's not my, that's why I went to India on my first trip, a long trip. So this is a country that looks at the world differently, that is, especially has got close cooperation with Russia in the military sphere and needs a lot of energy also from Russia. So this is a country that's a stronger geopolitical player and is talking to us as well as other allies as well as BRICS. So this is a country that's sending rockets to the moon, and it regards itself as the voice of the South. And they want to be on an equal footing with all the partners and also demands this. And at the same time, it is a country that wishes to have a deeper relationship within all areas of politics. So many people are visiting the German consulate and the Goethe Institute, and they hope that they can come here as specialists. Well, for the diversification of our delivery chain, this is absolutely a central issue. That's why I also went to Niger in summer, and that's why one of my first appointments was actually meeting the minister colleagues from the African Union in my office. And 3 weeks ago, I had the Nigerian colleague for Binational Commission. So that's why I went to ECOSOC summit to Colombia just recently, not just looking at the free trade agreement with the with the Mercosur countries, but also with regard to our supply chains and our economic resilience. So these are the regions we're looking at. I went to Bolivia, where it was also about the subject of rare earths. So these are countries that are listening to our arguments, but probably will not just take this over. So they don't need any patronization by us, but offers. So more intensive technological cooperation, and they will not take the time to wait for us. And the same thing with the Gulf region that since May, I've been there 3 times, we're building the state, and so also will differ from our ideas, but still these are states that are not just economically, but also in a political area. They are undertaking transformation, and there's enormous investments into the future technology there. So, and for the future resilience and independent energy supply of Europe, they will play an important role. And with whom, as international networked and export-oriented countries, so we have the interest in maintaining a rule-based international order. So this is an interest we share. So with the ceasefire in Gaza, we all experienced what the decisive mediating role Qatar took over, so that since the federal government came into office, there's an intensified visiting diplomacy in the Gulf region. And that's why I'm happy that in October I had the first strategic dialogue at foreign minister level with Qatar. But, ladies and gentlemen, how decisive it is today to actually leave the comfort zone of diplomacy is what we can not only see in other continents, but also in our immediate neighborhood. So last week, I visited the 6 West Balkan countries, and there I also met soldiers who are looking after our security there every day. So 30 years after Dayton and a quarter century after Dayton, and so there was wars left behind, but not all the conflicts that they were based on. So the 6 countries, they are very different, but they are unified by the joint perspective of the EU membership. This is a promise that we gave with the agenda of Thessaloniki in 2003. So the credibility of this promise remains a variable that determines in how far other geopolitical players, and above all, Russia, will find a entry into Europe that they're looking for. So with all geopolitical necessity of EU integration of the West Balkan states since 2022, they have moved the focus even more. So the membership process, of course, is based on performance. This is not a means in its own end, but it is to promote our European Union. So the expectations in the West Balkan region, the people have high expectations there, that their efforts towards European Union will pay out. And so fighting corruption, promoting democracy and the rule of law, those are important points. And that's why on the journey towards the EU, we want to create synergies and a gradual integration. And this also means there's a regional market as a first step towards the domestic market, because the people want to experience earlier and in concrete terms that their reform efforts will pay off. So, and this is what we embrace, and this as the largest bilateral giver and making it available soldiers there too. So within the inner yard of EU, we want to make these countries durable success stories, and our investment in the West Balkan countries is not just a friendly gesture, but it's in our own interest. So only a secure and stable West Balkan will guarantee a safe and secure and stable Europe. So in the geopolitical environment that we're describing, to be able to survive, we don't only need to think about the global partnerships and develop them and have tailor-made offers for our partners that can keep up with those of the competitors. But there's 2 more things we have to do. On the one hand, we also have to support the system that for 8 decades forms the framework of international relations, and that's the United Nations. So over the past years, you have to say it drastically, there's an existential crisis of the UN, and in this context, next summer, we want to have a non-permanent seat in the Security Council for the period of 2027 and 2028. So we do this because we're prepared to accept responsibility for the many wars and conflicts and to contribute to a solution, and because in our own interest, we will fight for a world in which international relations in the UN Charter and within the system of the United Nations will this will continue to be the framework. So still, now we of course have to go out to the world, but at the same time, you're not surprised to hear this from a conservative foreign minister. We also have to look after our classic partnerships like NATO and Europe. So our European neighboring states, so the core family and the transatlantic relations need to be maintained. And this also includes Japan, by the way, and I went there in August. And from which, with regard to economic security, we can learn a lot from Japan. So NATO and EU are and remain the foundation of our foreign policy, a foundation that we can strengthen and shore up in these times, saying remain transatlantic, but at the same time also become more European. So a foundation that gave us security, prosperity, and freedom for decades. And this foundation will remain. However, today, in view of the challenges challenges, and that has never come together so much in our lifetime, that needs to be supported. So the entire federal government needs to cooperate here. We need global partnership. This will require significant resources because diplomacy and foreign policy is not a luxury. And tomorrow I will also talk about that when I address the budget for the foreign ministry tomorrow. And it also requires new diplomacy in the whole world. It requires a modern and future-oriented foreign service with the respective structures. And to secure that, we will review the structures of the foreign ministry and restructure. This is a process that we're starting now. So it's not just that we want to react to the future, but we want to shape it actively. So, ladies and gentlemen, Germany does want and will take over responsibility in the foreign policy, and I'm sure our country is able to do that, and global partnerships are going to help us because we understand foreign policy never as a one-man show, but always as a team play with partners worldwide. So thank you very much for your attention.
Minister Wadephul, thank you very much for this thought-provoking speech. We now welcome Minister Wadephul for a moderated interview on ties that matter, partnerships as a strategic imperative in a fragmented world, hosted by Anna Sauerbrei, foreign editor at Die Zeit.
Herr Minister, auch nochmal von Minister, thank you very much for participating in this very special conference. Ties that matter. Strategic partnerships, this is what you talked about during your speech, but I think we would disappoint our audience if we didn't discuss a few issues regarding Ukraine. I think it's a topic that matters a lot to all of us here in the room. Let me start with my first question. That was something I thought about just now. How could it happen in the first place?
What?
How on earth could it happen that only 3.5 months after the last intervention of the Europeans in Washington, we have another proposal on the table, another proposal that contains the maximum demands of Russia, and that the Americans still adopt as their proposal?
Well, fortunately, we are a step forward, so a further development of this plan is what we experience. It's a constructive further development, and this is also Mark Rubio said in Geneva. And this is what we actually know already from the United States. So sometimes they've got an unorthodox way of going about solution of such problems, and at the end of the day, they are astonishingly flexible and ready also to actually accommodate the negotiating partner and also other sparring partners that they have in the respective scenario, and these are, for instance, us. And that's why we have, when the first time, when there was the first suggestion for the subjects, we picked up the telephone and we talked, and I had Steve Witkoff explaining this in detail. And in the first discussion, I noticed that he's like many Americans are in this field where they used to be active. They will accept what others say, and they're also ready and prepared to integrate these points into a solution concept. And this is an administration we have to learn to come to terms with and to manage. And you've seen that we Europeans can actually do that, and that the Ukrainians, on the one hand, are flexible, and on the other hand, also they've got their legitimate interests that they underline. And So in this exchange, this is the exchange process we are in, and what is still missing is some readiness, and I said that just now. So any readiness at all on the behalf of Russia to talk at all. And so the ceasefire we've been asking for so long to start that. So this is the point that the world shouldn't overlook. At this point, and so also the partners that I mentioned can be spared this. So there should be no other country of the world should overlook this. That is cooperating with Russia in economy and political.
But although the US are an important partner, you have read the 28-point program on Axios, the first one, or did you see it elsewhere?
Well, I said that I was able to talk in detail. So I first read the reports about it, and then this is how the relations and channels actually work with the United States of America. That in my very first text message, I got a call right away, and then we were able to discuss it. So this is a point that is important to me for the Federal Republic and the federal government, and if I may say so, that's what we were able to observe right from the outset. So I strive to also keep US in NATO and Europe so that they are committed. So this is a motivation for me very early on to actually commit to the 5%. So this is expenditure that we're doing in our own interests, but also in the US. They demand this from us, and this is the politics, that policy that we've continued, and also in the Middle East conflict. So we have the two-state solution as a commitment, and we know that, but we are not able to actually recognize the Palestinian state at this point in time. So when you look at the different dossiers, then it's always a policy of the federal government, a foreign policy that is geared towards actually coming to terms with the US and cooperating so that there's a great overlap that we're looking for, and also in this current situation. And that's why we and the Chancellor have actually got the weight when they talk to Trump.
You said Mr. Wittkop has heard the problems that the Europeans have. How about Donald Trump? Has he heard the arguments of the Europeans? Is he willing and ready to integrate that?
Well, we do communicate at the levels. That's the Federal Chancellor. You need to answer the Federal Chancellor. Well, you are. Well, I should not talk about that then.
Now, this morning we read that there will be continuing talk. There will be a meeting in the United Arab Emirates. The Russians, the Americans, and the Ukrainians will send delegations there. Did you know about this meeting, and are you going to receive a briefing?
Again, we are included in the process, but it is right, and I welcome this too expressly, and it's similar to the Middle East conflict that there's just the task and the possibility of the United States to drive this process and to steer this process, and that the US is a mediator. We are being heard. We are part of this process, but as I said, we understand it's not just us alone, but the Europeans, so it's the E3 format that is decisive in which we operate, but it's always to coordinate with the EU 27. Yet we play a role, and we actually also introduce our European interests. So that's why it was decisive of the weekend that all the aspects that Europe, NATO, etc., that they were extracted and that they are discussed separately in a separate procedure track in which we are involved.
What about the reactions of the Russian side? Did you hear anything?
I think it's a good sign that we're talking together. So in other words, there is a chance So step by step to start negotiations. I mean, that is decisive. All of us, we are longing for this war to be ended. And of course, it's about the conditions under which it is going to be ended, and also how the procedure is going to be designed. But with all the issues that we have and with all surprise that you also expressed in your initial question, I think it is, all in all, a good development that now we're talking at all, and that there is a mechanism that has started that might lead to the end of this awful war, and this has taken so many victims on both sides, day for day.
Maybe we zoom out a little and come back to the Berlin Pulse, the survey that you've quoted and that Mr. Pausen has quoted. There we see different perceptions. Some see America as a partner, but only 26% of the respondents say the US are the most important partner. Would you agree? Would you agree with the majority that the US are no longer the most important partner?
No, they are the most important partner, and we need to take over lead, and we have to explain it to the people. Unfortunately, the way policy is made also in the United States of America is not understood in Germany properly. So, but I do want to draw the attention of people to the fact that the NATO summit has shown that it's not just us. We take over more responsibility. I mentioned the 5%, but at the same time, it's Article 5 is underlined, and the United States clearly committed to NATO, to their commitment in Europe, and I do say that we Germans shouldn't call into question things that are not called into question in the States. So we should not ask questions unnecessarily that are not on the table. So I don't know any partner in the United States of America with all the issues and questions that we might have, so that the fundamental and principle readiness of the United States is called into question to defend Europe. No, that's not happening. Together with us and together to also pursue our security policy and values. So no one's calling that into question. We should know that, and we should also hold that in high esteem, and we should also make our contribution to that. And I believe that it's going to be, so over the course of the time, it's going to become clearer that there's an interdependence. So the United States of America have got a natural interest also to coordinate their China policy with Europe, for instance. And at the same time, we do this, and I just mentioned that, so which is quite clear for Europe. We need to, so what the French president calls more European sovereignty. So that's what we need to work on. So so looking more global partnerships. I mean, we're doing this. Other European partners are doing it. We're coordinating this clearly with the Council and the Commission. And this is a process. This is development. But I do advise to stay clear. So the United States are the most important partner, and this is true for the economic exchange as well as for our security policy.
That's correct. Of course, the summit was considered to be a great success, and Trump made a commitment to Article 5. In the 28-item plan, you would read as if NATO was a third person, a kind of entity that the Americans have nothing to do with. They talk about NATO as if it was an alien structure. What does that mean? Do they really support NATO?
Well, this fits very well because there is no such plan. It's well, not anymore. So this is recognized meanwhile. So I called it a further development. And again, all the questions with regard to NATO and Europe are going to be discussed in the further discussions between Russia and Ukraine. That's not going to be touched upon anymore. And together as NATO partners, we're on one side, and we are all singing from one sheet.
Again, zooming out of the transatlantic relations and taking a look at China. I do have one more question. You wanted to go to China? Are you going to go there this year?
Yes.
You know when?
Well, we're in the last stages of coordination. I'm confident that it's going to be soon.
Europe uses all kinds of terms for China, partner and systemic rival and many other concepts. You said it's all about reducing dependencies. How can we do that? What are the plans of the federal government to reduce our dependency from China?
Well, I'll stay with the classic definition of the European Union. That was partner, competitor, and systemic rival. And at any time, we're prepared to actually stress the aspect of partnership. And we do have the partnership in many areas, climate protection, for instance. So without a partnership cooperation without China, we're not going to achieve these goals. And this is happening. And there's also normal competition for an industrial country, state like Germany. It's not a problem, but it is also a system rivalry. I mean, this is a point that we address and together with other value partners in Southeast Asia. So we are going a journey or a path like China is going as well. So it's not a decoupling. We do not want any decoupling, but of course, so a route of diversification, a path of de-risking, and it's a path that we try to make us ourselves more independent. And this is a process. And I said this, we can learn from Japan, and Japan is pursuing this journey of economic security, and they started that a decade before. We should have been more attentive there, but now we're also going along this route. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel in this case. So we're doing this, by the way, together with many other countries, together as partners. And I gave you some small examples. For instance, I was the first European, if you so will, Western foreign minister in the old sense of the word. I went to Bolivia, where there's a new government of political center, and there's a German-Australian consortium that is looking into lithium, producing and refining. So that's a good example, a very practical example how good new sources can be opened up. And sometimes it's also about sales markets. But we do need to be persistent here. We need to do it, and we are coordinated. I talked with Commissioner Šefčovič and von der Leyen. So there's not just the one solution of this process of de-risking or diversification, but there's many aspects. There's many ways of achieving this goal, and when we do it together, it's going to be successful. But it needs time.
We also leave some time for your questions in the audience. But before we do that, let me look at a concept that we call closer to home. The survey shows that the French are seen more as a partner instead of the United States. 46% say that the French are the most important partner of Germany.
Well, in Europe, absolutely. So we've got a big shared European history with France, and as we can only be grateful as Germans after the events of the last century where we attacked France, and we had the most awful atrocities that happened by Germans there. So it's a gift, and of course the German-French axis remains the decisive significance. You see that with intensive consultations that we have on the government. So I have close coordination with Barrot, my colleague, and the Chancellor with Emmanuel Macron. And it's so maybe people didn't see that so much, but that the United Kingdom, for instance, also is so without having an EU debate in this place, but the UK understands itself as a European force and also takes over leadership role that we welcome very much. So I also have to say that in all seriousness, I want to add that, of course, France and the UK have got a big, important role as a standing member of the Security Council of the UN. So in the Federal Republic of Germany, so after the connection that we have already through the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Aachen, the bridges that we have with France, and it's also important to have bridges with Poland. So what Hans-Dietrich Genscher started, I want to reinvigorate the Weimar Triangle, and we can see that in this crisis situation how important it is that the interests, the feelings and concerns of Eastern Europe, and especially of Poland, needs to be considered and need to be integrated closely, and that's why I would like to see it that if we stay within the EU, that apart from France, Poland is one of our most important partners.
The Weimar Triangle. That is also something that Friedrich Merz has addressed during the election campaign. He gave a speech at the Körber Foundation, focused very much on that, and said that the silence between Poland and Germany must be stopped. Now, internationally speaking, the E3 format seems to be the most important one. You were together with the French and the British sides in August, and now crisis diplomacy took place without Donald Tusk, and the Polish angry about it.
Well, the E3 format has proven its worth in various situations and challenging situations. This is a tried and tested format that is ready to work, and it's also got an effective way of voicing European interests and concerns. So this is what we saw in the Iran dossier already, and I'm in contact with my colleagues all the time. So we've got the snap-back mechanism, and this is closely coordinated and tightly coordinated, and we've got great agreement in the Security Council for that. And then we've got the Ukraine diplomacy. The Federal Chancellor always stressed that we will look. So this is a basic understanding of German foreign policy. We want to have all the EU partners included. That includes Poland as well as Italy. And so if I were to start to give you a list, then it's going to be difficult again. So we regard it as our central task. Everything that we've got in the E3 format with our European partners to coordinate that closely. And everyone knows what we are saying there and what we are representing there, and everyone knows what we are rejecting there. So this is, we do strive to achieve a consensus. That's not always easy every day with countries like Hungary, but with the majority of the others, there's zero differences. And thus, we understand that the E3 format is more like a working muscle. And it's like for our practical reasons, this can be a very close cooperation. But we wouldn't do anything in this format which the European partners couldn't sustain.
Thank you very much. We do have some time for questions now coming from our audience. Mr. Pertis. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Volker Pertes. It's very good to see how you move around the world as a foreign minister. And what I'd like to ask is to reflect about, so after the first 9 months, so what you believe, what German could do bilaterally, and what one could do under the guidance and coordination of the High Commissioner for Foreign Policy of the EU, and what one could do best in various coalitions of the relevant and the willing. So that's not just E3, I suppose, but it's also partners in Africa or ASEAN or others. Thank you very much. Right, sure. So we need to have a great degree of flexibility also in other constellations, and to think in these constellations, and you So my last telephone call yesterday evening was with the foreign minister of the Emirates, and that was Sudan, and that's there's a unilateral ceasefire of the RSF forces there, and there I work together with countries that play a role in that region and for whom it is important. So for Saudi Arabia that's important, for Egypt that's important, and this is, you need to include them in this these formats. And so we need to, so we just need to be flexible there, which we do need to get used to, this new degree of flexibility, and we shouldn't be envious if others do something without us, and so we also, so if we do something without them, they shouldn't be envious either. So it's not so easy, but that's the right answer to what we need addressed nowadays. And I am, of course, with regard to the European Union and the task of the High Commissioner, I mean, I also need them to actually define the focus, and that's she's got a certain focus, and maybe she's been chosen for this. It is the Ukraine-Russia dossier, where she, as the High Commissioner, is got her focus very much, and so of course she's got a credibility there and a background knowledge which is of great value for all of us.
I think we can take one more question. There is a lady in the middle. Good morning, I'm Sabine Fischer, a German Fund for Science and Policy. I would like to say that I do work regarding the war against Ukraine. Thank you, Minister, for speaking about that. I think Europe, together with Ukraine, ever since the beginning of this year, we managed to prevent the worst from happening. That's important, but that's the reactive part of European policy. The active, the proactive part was something you did not mention, so let me come back to that. I do think we need a more resolute support of the Ukrainian defense. And here we also need to use the frozen Russian assets. We need to fight against the Russian shadow fleet and many more things. Could you say something about what we can expect for the next month and maybe years to come?
Sure. It's indeed. So I didn't mention it because for me it's a matter of fact, but of course you have to stress it time and again and say it quite clearly. So we've got 19 sanction packages that we've packaged in the EU, even if it's slow and difficult, and so, and you would have liked to have, instead of 19, it would have been 9 with greater impact. So it does show that we in Europe, step by step, are able to increase the political and economic price for Russia. So that was the wish and the intention. So furthermore, the Federal Chancellor has so with regard to the use of the frozen Russian assets, tabled a political proposal, and that the European Commission is now preparing in detail, so it remains a clear German goal to, so within this year, so and the European Council just before Christmas, to come to a solution here, and to enable that we can use these frozen assets. So these are difficult legal and financial and political negotiations that we're conducting. Also, the national implementation is challenging, but there shouldn't be any doubt at all that the federal government, that Germany, will do everything in our power to support Ukraine, and of course it should be that the case that Russia, for this war of aggression, has to pay and is not going to be spared. So, and one should not doubt our determination to continue. There shouldn't be any doubt whatsoever. And we hope that there's going to be speedy negotiations, but our point and our weight in these negotiations is that we're prepared to conduct these steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I know you have to go. Thank you for coming here. Thanks for taking time.